Oh boy. Endings, right? Hey guys, I'm Jackson. This is my review for Vikings Valhalla Season 3, the final season. That's right, this is not only the third season, it is the final season. And you sure wouldn't know it by watching it. If I didn't know this was the final season, I would just be like, oh yeah, that was kind of the same as Season 2. A little bit disappointing, some moments of greatness. I still love the characters I was introduced to in that spectacular, fabulous, action-packed, character-driven, politically intriguing Season 1. Oh boy, do I love Season 1. And Season 3, well, it's not as good as Season 1, but hey, Season 2 was worse. Probably. I'm keen to see where it's going to go next. But knowing this is the third and final season, it's just baffling. It's just frustrating, and ultimately it ends up just being kind of disappointing, and a kind of a bit of a just like a like a bit of a shrug. Like it's just like, this is your final season? I'm not really sure how this happened or why this happened, but the biggest issue for this season that kind of ruins anything good and makes the bad things even worse and more baffling and frustrating is that this season is just so rushed. It's so rushed. They are just running towards that season finale. Sorry, no, a Freudian slip, because it just feels like a season finale. They are running towards the series finale. They are just rushing to that finish line. They are just going so quickly to get to this end point. And there's this moment at the start of the finale where you're kind of like, oh, I kind of like this. Like it's all kind of come full circle. All of our heroes are back in one spot. A similar thing is kind of happening. It's a fun kind of similar thing, but kind of completely different to what happened in the first episode of the show. And I thought that was really nice. I'm like, wow, if this was like the end of season 5, this would be a satisfying way to end the show. But how we get there is so rushed, it's baffling. There are way too many characters in this season. There are just so many characters. It has the problem that Game of Thrones had on occasion, where it just had like so many different places and locations, and they are all just completely random and separate, and they don't interact with any of each other, and so you kind of left being like, you get 2 minutes with this one character, and then they're just gone for an episode, and then 2 minutes with another character, and then they're gone for the episode. It's just so rushed and underdeveloped, and then sometimes you end up spending time with characters that you don't really feel like you should be spending time with, and you're like, can we follow the main characters we've been following since the beginning? And like new villains come up, and they're like, I'm the villain. And if it was like just season 3 of like however many seasons, just a new season big bad, you're like, yeah, sure, we need a season big bad. But they rock up and you're like, this is the final season. Is this meant to be the final big bad for our heroes to fight against? There is a moment where we get introduced to this character and he's having a dream, and it's like this entire flashback thing over 15 seconds. He wakes up and this other guy's like, oh, you just had a nightmare. Well, you're going to be welcome to my nightmare. And that other kid that was having the nightmare had this massive flashback and all this stuff is essentially pointless, is essentially completely unrelated to anything that's happening, and they set up this whole thing with this guy who's ruling in his stead until he's of age, and just nothing comes of it. Nothing comes of it, and it's just this pointless 4 minutes that feels like it alone could be a full episode worth of time and story spent to this character and this situation and this whole thing going on, but because it doesn't even get finished or wrapped up, it's just pointless random time wasting when we should be spending time with at least our 3 main leads and maybe a couple of other characters, although there's really no time. Out of our 6 original main characters from season 1, only 2 of them have plots that actually resolve and arcs that actually end, but they still feel kind of unfulfilling, and I'm kind of left wanting more. But at least Knut and Harold's arcs, at least for a season, end. And at least there's some kind of like beginning, middle, and end of their arcs, of their stories for this season, and carrying over the 3 seasons itself. And even still, with those characters that have had like successful arcs that at least were arcs and ended, they're still rushed, they're still underdeveloped, they've got all the same issues everything has in this season, and it's kind of just insane. But it's not as bad as Leif and Freydi's, our 2 other leads, who are essentially side characters this season because they keep introducing 15 different of Knut's sons, or you've got Olaf's son who rocks up. He's like, I'm a big bad character now. I'm a villain. And then we've got all these other different characters that just rock up. We have all of the people off in Constantinople who rock up. There's a guy who's like, Harold, you won't like me. I'm like Budget the Mountain. And he's like a major character that gets way more screen time than any of the main leads back in Norway or back in that side of the world. It's just kind of insane. And once again, I'll say this a million times. If this was just season 3, I'd be like, that's fine. This was the Constantinople season. I wanted to spend time there. Why spend all of season 2 getting there just to kind of leave? Like, I want to spend time there. But this is the final season. I don't understand why the show was 3 seasons. This definitely feels like it should be a 5-season show with the arcs and the stories they're telling. So many characters start the season, they're like, I'm off to do this one thing. And they've got like a mission, and there might even be a map involved where they're literally pointing to a map being like, I'm going here. And you're like, wow, that's pretty exciting. I actually got my phone out at one point, and I'm like, so if he's there and he wants to get there, where is that? Because the map actually, spoilers for like the world map right now, we actually know where all the places are. So I checked, and I was like, oh, they're going there. That's crazy. They don't get there. They don't get there. They don't even feel like they're close to getting there. It's kind of crazy. I don't even understand why certain things were brought up or mentioned. It just feels like so much was thrown up into the air as if there was a season 4. But then you watch the finale and it has so many moments and like things that make you go, this is very clearly their series finale. Like the way things play out in those last 5-10 minutes feels like this kind of bittersweet goodbye to everything, even though there's so much up in the air. This really does remind me, in the worst way possible, of Rome Season 2, which I don't know if you all remember it. It's a pretty old show now, but its final 2 episodes of Season 2 were essentially all of Season 3 and 4 kind of truncated and smashed and cramped down into a little box and produced as episodes 9 and 10, I think it was, of Season 2. The last 2 episodes was a quick fast-forwarded abbreviation of everything they wanted to cover in the next couple of seasons. And you can feel it, because things just happen. People are just in different places. People are doing different things. Everything's just moving so quickly, and it's so rushed and underdeveloped. But I don't know, back then I was kind of like, well, at least we got to see certain like moments and elements happen with those characters. In this case, Vikings was a really, really popular show that went for like 100+ episodes. Like, but towards the end of the series, there were like 16 episode seasons, and to have 3 seasons of 8 episodes, which is almost just essentially like a season and a half of late game Vikings, I don't understand it, because it's not like this show is lacking for material, lacking for things to cover, because there's so much really interesting, juicy stuff on the political side, on the war side, on the character emotional side. Like, there are moments in this season where you're like, oh, we get to see this little thing. Oh, we're going over here to do this. Like, there is a moment where Canute just goes, here's like 16 people. Who's going to be king if I leave and don't be king? And you're like, well, this is all actually kind of interesting, and everyone we get introduced is really interesting. For the 2.5 minutes they all get each, it's just so underdeveloped and so rushed. It's just, yeah, it just leaves me feeling very disappointed. Is it as rushed and disappointing as the final 2 seasons of Game of Thrones? No, absolutely not. Of course it isn't. But to be fair, my favorite character in Vikings Valhalla, I don't like them as much as my least favorite character in Game of Thrones. So it's never going to compare on that scale, but it has that same feeling. Like, if this is your favorite show, you are going to feel absolutely cheated with this final season. And there are a couple of moments here or there. Early on, we get a massive battle, action set piece, and it reminded me a lot of the London Bridge scene, even though it's not as good, but in terms of the really fun kind of battle stratagem and the battle tactics and all of that stuff with some really fun action and fighting and sword play and all that stuff, and all the different set pieces and things in play to have the battle play out. Really exciting. But once again, there is a moment where like they go running into this situation, and I'm like, oh, I am so keen to see more battle, and then it cuts and the episode's over, and then the next episode, there's no more fighting. And you're like, yeah. Rushed. So the plot over in England, with Canute and Emma and Godwin and all of those characters, it ends in such an insane, crazy way, where it's like, it's going one way, then it kind of twists and turns right at the end, and it ends on just a classic season cliffhanger. Like, it ends and it goes, whoa, what's going to happen in season 4? But it's not, and they knew they weren't making a season 4. They've had this plan for 3 seasons since I can remember. I remember after season 1 ended, and I'm like, I love that way more than I expected. I looked up and they're like, we're doing 24 episodes. We're doing 3 seasons, 8 episodes each. And it's like, okay. So they really have like a game plan. Like there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like, let's go. They know what they're going to do. This is going to feel really satisfying. Whereas now, having finished all 24 episodes that apparently was planned from the beginning, and it feels like the budget was cut from season 1 because season 1 still has the best action set pieces. Season 1 has 2 giant, amazing, really well staged, looks beautiful, lots of really good strategy and stuff going on, and there's lots of one-on-one or little skirmish battles with a couple of people throughout the whole season. Lots of action. So the budgets were clearly absolutely stripped away. And so when I must have read that 24 episodes, like a week or a day after that first season aired, I guess they went, no, we're not doing like a whole show. We'll give you 3. Try and finish it in 3. Whereas maybe they planned to go as long as Vikings went. 6 seasons. 6 seasons in a movie. I don't want a movie. But just... it's so disappointing. I really like this show. I really love all of the themes about the Vikings infighting between pagan and Christianity. Every single actor in this show is still doing a fantastic job. I particularly think Harold, Fredes, and Leif, like our 3 main leads, are spectacular. Canute, Godwin, Emma, all very, very good. Even though after season 1, it kind of feels like the England plot feels like a little bit too separate, just a little bit, where it's like, I kind of felt like I needed it to tie back around somehow. Because I just feel like season 1, even though at a certain point there is 3 plots going on, it felt very focused, very concentrated. It felt like we were telling this one story about this one point in time about Vikings. Narratively, it felt like it was doing one thing. And then season 2, it kind of went, and then season 3, it's just all over the place. It's just doing whatever. And then characters will end plots, and then the next episode, they're like, I'm back. And we're doing Game of Thrones season 9 levels of jumping across continents. But I would say maybe worse, but not as bad as like the lake sequence in season 7 of Game of Thrones, because nothing could ever be as baffling with the travel time as that. Because that's just, like, sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat at night, and, like, I have a nightmare that was that episode, and I'm like, I wake up going, oh, it was just a nightmare. Nothing that bad could possibly happen to something I love. And then, like, as I wake up and I'm having a coffee, I realize that did happen. And I live in this horrible waking nightmare world where something so stupid could happen. This show doesn't really do anything as stupid, but it just is kind of baffling and weird, where characters will be over here, then suddenly they're over here, and you're like, well, I guess 6 months has passed. I guess? I don't know. In a lot of ways, who cares? So Vikings Valhalla as a 3rd season is serviceable. There are probably more good moments than bad. It's probably better than season 2 in most ways. But as a final season, it is incredibly disappointing, it is incredibly underwhelming, and it is super rushed, which botches all of the goodwill you have for all of the good moments. Just so disappointing. I love season 1 so very much. The taking of the London Bridge is one of my favorite action set pieces. I love all of the characters. I love all of the battle kind of tactics and the characters going on this journey after that moment where the world opens up after this big event. And I was so excited to see where the show was going to go after that moment. And it kind of peaked in season 1, which is never something you want to say about a show. Yeah. Oh well, I guess it's time to start rewatching Original Recipe Vikings. Oh, actually, the last thing. Speaking of, I was just thinking, I was like, Ragnar Lothbrok. Oh, he's so good. He's Australian. Makes me proud to be Australian, knowing someone like him is also Australian. I don't know why. We just don't have that many actors. We cherish people like Ragnar and Hugh Jackman like you wouldn't believe. It's a problem. But speaking of Ragnar Lothbrok, one other huge issue with this season, and there's some good stuff, but the bad stuff's kind of more interesting to talk about. Vikings is maybe the best example of showing aging in a series. Vikings had sexy, charming, the most handsome man in the world, Ragnar Lothbrok, and then they did a time jump and they shaved his head, gave him a long, giant beard, and he's just this old, decrepit-looking, bald, bearded old man wizard guy, and it just looks spectacular. When I think about Ragnar now, that's the look I picture. And it was just so bold of them to take the sexy guy and make him into this old, hermit, bald, bearded guy. And it shows the aging of time so very well. Sure, Lagatha had like a couple of painted greys in her hair and she looked exactly the same. But, I mean, I'll take the Ragnar from me, and I understand. They're like, we want to keep the sexy woman sexy, because we made our sexy man sexier somehow. They are very good at using makeup to show the passage of time. It's like the best example I can think of in TV. It's so good. This season is set 7 years after the other 2 seasons. 7 years. You wouldn't know it. If you miss the title card that comes up at the start of the season that says 7 years later, and you miss the time that every single character says anything at any point, they say it about, 415 times where a character's like, oh, for the last 7 years I've been king and there's been peace and nothing of interest has happened. And the character's like, well, I've been waiting to take my vengeance for 7 long years. You just wouldn't know, except for the characters that were children that are now just adults and look entirely different for the most part. Actually, one of them looked pretty good. I was like, that's pretty good. That's good casting. But, like, you wouldn't know if you were looking at our 5 to 7 lead characters. They all look like they did last year when they filmed Vikings Valhalla Season 2. Shame on you, Vikings Valhalla. Although I say that, and obviously it was a budgetary thing, because the budget for this was probably, like, 1/50th of the budget for Vikings. Otherwise, where was my battle sequences, Vikings Valhalla? And on that note, I'm going to go and watch Vikings. And probably forget that I saw this season. Ugh.